Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Enlightenment Through Understanding and Wisdom show with your host, Jacob Strong. I wanted to thank everyone for participating in this show and helping bring awareness to this situation that we find ourselves in called life. So today we're going to discuss the effect that shame has on our outlook of life, as well as our reaction and our demeanor. What that looks like as a victim of shame, which is more or less it's a victim of abuse, and shame is a side effect of that abuse. And so what we're going to be discussing is what that looks like and how we interpret that, as well as what our reactions are to that. So one of the effects of shame, what that looks like for the victim, is self-criticism and self-blame. And as a victim of child abuse and neglect myself, I can say that self-blame, yes. I can't say that I had much self-criticism. However, I guess I could say that I did a little bit. I always played it off as a joke. But I did have a lot of self-blame because I was the only other male in the family that should have done something, and I didn't. And so there is, self-blame that I've reflected back over the years, and so I can definitely say that that's one aspect. The other outcome is self-neglect. That's a very strong suit that I experienced as a result of my negative childhood, and then of course later on with my narcissistic ex-wife that I ended up marrying. I ended up having a lot of self-neglect, and so that's another area. Self-destructive behaviors are pretty common. Drugs, alcohol, too much or too little food. Even something as what appears to be accident prone or mutilation, self-mutilation. But it's interesting because someone who is accident prone could also be a side effect of that child abuse from when they were a child. And and it's a lack of taking oneself into consideration when doing something. And so they'll oftentimes, end up in workplace accidents more frequently, which I find very interesting. I did not exhibit that myself, but Psychology 101 says that this is a definitely a very there's a lot of evidence linking these together. Which, when you look at the demeanor of a person, if they, are doing alcohol or drugs or self-mutilating stuff, then it becomes apparent that they're not concerned about their own health. They're not concerned about, protecting themselves. And so that would also be, reflected in the workplace, being accident prone, which then can create trauma or abuse for a coworker, right? And then, of course, that coworker, it's up to them to interpret that information that they are witnessing, that they are experiencing, that behavior. Um, the next one is self-sabotaging behavior, such as um, starting a fight with a spouse or a loved one, sabotaging jobs, going through, 25 jobs by the 25th birthday. Um, that's also a very common sign of shame. And again, when you look at that from a whole perspective, you can see that it looks that it appears that this person does not care. And so what's interesting about that is it may not be an issue of this person not caring. They just are not um, concerned with themselves, or not concerned with bettering themselves, or not concerned with um, their own prolonged life, or anything like that. And so it can be difficult to determine whether this child who's becoming an adolescent or adult is going to turn down the path of an empath, or whether they're going to turn down the path of the abuser and become abusers themselves. If they do not become aware of what they are doing, then, or the effects of what they are doing, then it's very likely that they will um, turn down that road of the abuser, um, and justify it based on it happened to me, so thus it must be okay. Perfectionism is another um, effect of shame. They're afraid to admit that they've made a mistake. And so when you put that into perspective as a victim, they're afraid to say that, you know, um, um, that they made a mistake for fear of repercussions, for fear that they won't be accepted, for fear that the outcome could be worse than what they've already gone through. And so and so that again is something that you can identify in shame with a victim. They oftentimes don't believe that they deserve good things, and when they don't believe that they deserve good things, um, again, they don't progress. They don't seek a better job. They don't seek to improve their life, or a potential future spouse's life, because they have that view that was ingrained into them that they were not worthy of anything. They were not even worthy of the air that they were breathing. And so that shame, continually resonates within that victim. And until they realize that it's not about deserving a, brand new Rolls Royce, it's about, improving their state of being, their life, without having to, seek that new Rolls Royce or that Ferrari. They don't have to go to those extremes to get something nice. They can be content with still living in a basement, paying rent. But what they do have, they take care of. So they might have a nice computer, or they might have a good book selection. Um, once they have overcome that belief that they do not deserve good things. And so that's one thing that you can identify with a person who has a lot of shame is they won't even um, they won't even try because they don't believe that they have um, that they deserve anything good. Um, their belief is that if others really knew them, that they would dislike or be disgusted by them. And so this is very interesting because they don't they believe that another person will think that they are disgusting. And so that's the effect of that shame that's still resonating in their system. And it's only once they stop putting so much value into that other person's belief and assuming that that other person believes that they um, are disgusted by them, that they can overcome that and say, it doesn't matter if someone else does think that or doesn't think that. It doesn't make any difference to them. And so with that being said, it's difficult to see that when it's happening, but it's also very eye-opening when you do finally see it. The next thing to identify someone who has gone through a lot of shame or who has shame is people pleasing. They will oftentimes spend hours or days um, trying to please people. Um, and it can be a loved one. Most of the time it is a loved one that they are trying to please. It's someone that is significant to them. And that's because, they are still seeking that validation from someone who's close to them. And again, you want to be loved by a family member who's significant to you, or a loved one, or a spouse. But there is times to just say, I don't want to do that, or, that's not what I, want in my life, a vehicle or whatever. And and that's okay, even if that other person that's close to them does want that. Because now you're strong enough to say, I'm not going to be ashamed of having my own opinion in this matter. So that's a pretty big sign right there of someone who um, has a lot of shame as a victim and who still exhibits that shame. The other one, which is kind of ironic, this is a very narcissistic trait, is they can be very critical of others. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to give that shame away. And I've actually had this trait as well, especially when um, dealing with other drivers on the road. And so I can honestly say I've experienced this. And so it's only once we can subdue that shame and say, we all make mistakes, and just because we were the victims, that doesn't mean that we have to, you know, we don't have to keep being victimized every day. So intense rage, so someone who is in frequent physical fights. And again, some of these are difficult to differentiate between a narcissist and also a victim who's dealing with a lot of shame. And so until you can put everything into perspective, you cannot discount or discredit any of this information. And that's why I strongly encourage anyone who's listening to study, to get in and find out, because as we go through all these, we can see that a narcissist, as well as a victim of abuse, can have very similar common traits, common demeanor, common behaviors. But it's only when you start analyzing every topic that you will see a change. You will see when someone who is being protective of someone else, or a loved one, that you realize that, wait, that's the empath, that's the abuse victim, and that's the narcissist. And so you have to have a really good memory, and you also have to have the ability to put all these into the form of a cube, I guess would be the way that I would say it, and see which cube fills up first with most of these um, behaviors and tendencies and demeanors. And then that's how you're going to be able to identify whether someone is a narcissist or an empath, or someone who's suffering from PTSD or CPTSD. The next one is acting out against society, breaking the rules or breaking the laws. And again, we've discussed this, that morality, according to Psychology 101, stops at level 4 with most people, when they are just reverting back to the childhood of trying to appease local government. And so just because someone is breaking the rules or the laws, that doesn't mean that they are a bad person, doesn't mean that they are even experiencing shame. They could be breaking those rules to set an example. It could be trying to further better the system by saying, hey, wait a minute, this law is not morally right in this particular case. And only those people will have complete satisfaction at the end of their life, because they will know that they tried with everything that they could. Um, so the next one is repeating the cycle of abuse, either through like victim behavior or abusive behavior. Again, there are two types of abuse victims. There are those who victimize again, and then there are those who become the victim again. So again, as my psychotherapist told me 20 years ago, he told me he was not worried about me becoming my dad. He told me he was worried I would marry my dad. Now, most of y'all are thinking, that he was being literal, but that was a figure of speech that he was using. What he was um, what he was trying to say was my dad used God to manipulate the family, used God to justify sexually abusing us as children, and hurting us physically and emotionally. And so what I ended up finding with a woman whom I ended up marrying was a woman who used God to justify all of her actions. Again, she moved out of my house because God told her to marry her ex-husband and not me. So you can see I married the exact same one. So I became the victim again. And so that is how you can clearly tell which one is the narcissist, and which person is dealing with shame from a narcissistic abuse, not necessarily a narcissistic abuse. It could be something else, but either way, dealing with some sort of trauma, particularly as a child, and um, so that's where you can get that misconception, unless you really analyze it and really, dive deep into looking into what this person has gone through. Um, the next thing that you will see a lot in victims is they'll often continue to go back to someone who is abusive. You see this a lot, and women in particular, at least ways it's more public in women, when they go back to an abusive spouse, and they think that it's love, and they don't honestly think that it's love, but they don't believe that they are worthy. They do not believe that they deserve to be treated with love and kindness and respect, because they were taught from a young age that they were not were not worthy of that. And again, it has nothing to do with us being worthy of love or kindness. That's how we should treat each other, regardless of um, whether someone deserves it or not. And and so that's where you have to, in order to overcome that shame, you have to come to that realization that, it doesn't make me better than someone else just because I think that I am worthy of love, or I think that I am worthy of kindness, or I think that I am worthy of respect. But I give that out to everyone. So that means that we know that it is right, that it is morally right to do this. So if it's morally right to give it, then it's morally right to accept it. And I think that that's very critical to understanding why that it's that in particular with victims, they don't they don't believe that they should be treated with love. They don't believe they should be treated with kindness and respect, because it's been so one-sided for years that they don't recognize that, the wave that goes out has to come back in. That's You never see an ocean wave go out and never come back in, and neither do you ever see it come in and never go back out. So that's a part of life. It has to be. And so once you can overcome that and take that out of your, take that shame out and say, no, you know, it's not that I'm better than anyone else, but uh, in order for life to happen, in order for life to work, the wave has to go out and the wave has to return, has to come back in. So move on from that abusive relationship and get rid of that shame for thinking that you do not deserve, because it really doesn't have anything to do with deserve to begin with. All right. Um, Shame can cause a person to humiliate or degrade his their spouse, or their children, and um, and so you got to watch out for that one, because again, that can be a narcissistic trait. That can be someone who is the abuser side, right? They commonly um, demean you. They constantly put you down. But that's also a survival tactic of an abuse victim after the abuser has left. They come to the realization to some degree that they were wronged, and so they feel shameful for it because they still realized that they stayed in that relationship or they stayed. And so then they kind of want to put everyone else down to make it sound um like at least they didn't do that, right? It kind of develops that mentality of, well, at least ways I didn't, go and marry someone and a pen pal from prison. And and so then and so then you kind of develop that mindset of at least I didn't do that. And and of course that can lead you down to the wrong path as well, because it can have the effect that you can now end up taking on the demeanor that that you're still better than everyone else because at least you didn't do any of that, or you didn't do something else much worse. And and so that's one thing that we want to be careful of as a victim, um, healing with that shame to get rid of that mentality of at least I didn't do this or that. Because in all honesty, we all deal with trauma. We all process trauma differently. And so whether someone turns to using drugs or taking drugs, or if someone turns to some other crutch to help them through, that doesn't mean that we were any better than them, because we didn't do that. We had another crutch. We just haven't identified it yet. And I think that's very important. And I'll be honest, my crutch, instead of doing drugs, was I was determined to have a family, and I was determined to push my wife on that swing on the front porch well into her 90s. And I didn't realize that was my crutch. Instead of being patient and learning to recognize human trait, learning to recognize um, what was really good for me, and what was really good for society as a whole. I went and believed the first narcissist whom I met, whom said all the right words, whom had all the right um, um, demeanor and words, but she didn't have any follow through. So again, I didn't recognize that if you really want to know someone, you have to look at the three things. That is, you know, does what they say match what they do, and does what they do match their body language? If all three of those match, then they mean what they say. My ex used to say all the time, "Well, if we were married, I would do this, or if this were, done, I would do that." Well, if you wanted that lifestyle, you would already be doing it, right? And of course, I didn't understand that at such a young age in my 20s that, yeah, if you want a better life, you're going to go get that better job. You're not going to sit idly by and say, well, when it comes, I'll take it. No, you're going to go out and seek it. You're going to go out and do it. Um, Shame can cause someone to have an emotional outburst, a fueling of rage that can trigger abusiveness. And again, we want to be careful with that because that is both a narcissistic trait, being very temperamental, and it can also be a an empath or a victim trait. However, it's been my experience that um, the outburst comes from a reaction. It's called a reactive abuse. And I did exhibit that again with my ex because of the constant abuse and neglect that I was put through by her. It caused me to react, and sometimes, um, physically react, throw a cup across the yard, whatever. And so it has the appearance that person is a narcissist or that person is abusive. But what it is it's that process of shame that they are still dealing with, that instead of recognizing that this person that they are now joining themselves to is the same as what they left before, and that it doesn't do society any good and it doesn't do mankind any good to be joined with this abusive person. And so the only way that they can do it is to react and try and, you know, get the situation under control. And of course, you know, shame, especially from childhood abuse, can manifest itself in more than one way. It can manifest itself um, in multiple different ways. You could have every single one of these that I just said, or you could have one or two of these that I've just said. And so it's important to note that some of this, it doesn't necessarily also mean that it came repeatedly as a child. You could have been bullied in school by someone and it touched on a particular subject, and so it caused you to have shame about a particular subject. So if you were, born in a wheelchair and you got bullied because you were in a wheelchair, you might have shame about your legs, right? Or you might have shame about a particular part of your body. And so then that creates some or all of what I just mentioned in here, only with the topic of, your legs, right? And so once you can realize that childhood abuse and childhood neglect and trauma, excuse me, um, doesn't always come from the parent or the guardian. It can also come from someone whom you cared about or someone whom you looked up to or had a value in their opinion. Or maybe it was someone who put themselves into your life continually to harass you, like a bully. And so that's where these effects can be very damaging. And um, I'm in the middle of studying this other book about um, the layers of the brain and how we remember stuff, and I'll probably go over that this coming week. Um, but I'll touch on it a little bit. It actually scientifically proves why we react and how we have reactions to specific um, um, specific things, specific triggers that happen in our lives. And and it's kind of interesting because it embeds itself into your brain on a scientific level. And again, we'll talk about that this next week. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But anyway, as always, still trying to get the our new co-host up. She's still got to get some things worked out and ironed out, but we will be expecting her very soon, and uh, and we will tackle this human behavior problem as a team and try and bring awareness that narcissism and abuse do not come from one gender. It is not gender specific. It is a human condition. And so at any rate, yeah, we look forward to having her on the show. But in the meantime, y'all have a good day, and we look forward to seeing y'all next week. All right, have a good